My dad raised his glass and said, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space." Everyone laughed. I smiled and said, "Good thing I just got my own place 3,000 miles away." "Don't worry, you'll never." You know that feeling when you realize a single moment can shatter your entire world? It happened to me on Thanksgiving night when my own father raised his glass, looked straight at me, and said with a smirk, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space." And what did I do? I smiled. But what I said next, it changed everything. This isn't just a story about a family. It's a story about finding your voice when you've been told you don't have one, about building your own damn table when no one will give you a seat. My name is Isabel Hart, and this is how one dinner, years in the making, finally set me free. I grew up in a quiet suburb of Indianapolis, a place where every lawn was manicured, every mailbox had a family name, and every father, it seemed, was bursting with pride for his son. Our house, a small white one with green shutters, always smelled of coffee and motor oil. On the surface, we were picture perfect. Robert, the dependable dad; Linda, the gentle homemaker; Ethan, the football hero. And then there was me, the quiet one, the one they barely remembered to mention. Inside our home, I was a shadow. The contrast that made Ethan's light shine even brighter. His trophies, silver footballs, gleaming medals, certificates, lined our hallway like a museum dedicated to my father's pride. I used to trace the engraved letters of Ethan's name, wondering if mine would ever belong there. When Ethan won, Dad would hoist him onto his shoulders, beaming. When I won, he'd glance at my ribbon, maybe a blue one, and say, "That's cute, honey. But don't forget Ethan's game is tonight." That sentence wasn't just a memory. It was the rhythm of my childhood, the relentless beat of favoritism. I remember my first science fair. I was 10. I'd spent weeks working on a cardboard volcano that actually erupted with baking soda and vinegar. Sneaking into the kitchen after everyone slept, testing proportions under the hum of the refrigerator. I thought this time, Dad would see me. When I showed him my small blue ribbon, he just chuckled. "That's nice, Izzy, but make sure you're ready for your brother's big match tonight. He'll need all of us cheering." Us. That word never really included me. 2 months later, it was my birthday. Mom baked a small vanilla cake, no frosting flowers, no candles spelling out my name. "It's just family this year," she'd whispered. The very next week, they threw Ethan a massive backyard bash for his college acceptance. Tense music, half the neighborhood. I watched from my window, the fairy lights flickering, as my brother posed with friends, holding a cake that read, "To our star." That night, it hit me. Invisibility wasn't an accident in our family. It was a tradition. Even dinner had its strict hierarchy. Our big oak dining table had 6 chairs, but for years, even as I grew taller, I was relegated to the kids' table. At 16, I was still there, knees bumping the edge, listening to grown-up conversations I was never invited into. Every attempt I made to speak was met with polite nods, quick dismissals, or worse, silence. Ethan, though? He could talk about anything: college, football, cars, the weather, and Dad would beam, as if he'd just heard poetry. If I brought up something fascinating I'd learned, like how honey never spoils, or that light from distant stars was older than our planet, Dad would frown. "You think too much, Izzy. You'll tire yourself out." Mom wasn't cruel, she was careful. The kind of woman who believed keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. When Dad spoke, she'd fold napkins. When I cried, she'd whisper, "Don't make things harder for your father." Her softness hurt more than his words. At least his sharp dismissal acknowledged my existence. Hers erased it entirely. I saw a picture once, Thanksgiving, maybe 2006. Ethan and Dad, both in matching shirts, grinning. I'm off to the side, a blur, half out of frame, holding a plate. Mom took that photo. I looked at it years later and saw it, my smile not quite reaching my eyes. The quiet child, trying not to take up too much space in her own home. Still, I tried. Straight A's. Scholarships. Volunteering. Building robots from old radios. None of it cracked their wall. The more I achieved, the more invisible I became, as if my brightness threatened their carefully constructed picture. Once, when I was 15, Ethan failed an exam. Dad spent the entire weekend helping him study. That same weekend, I got a letter for a state science competition. When I handed it to him, he nodded distractedly, eyes still on Ethan's notes. "That's good," he said. "Just don't make your brother feel bad." Don't make your brother feel bad. That sentence became the first rule of our household. My silence was the price of their comfort. Looking back, I learned to disappear so early. I learned to laugh softly, to shrink in photos, to walk lightly so the floorboards wouldn't creak. I learned to make myself small enough to fit into the leftover spaces no one wanted. By 18, I had perfected the art of being unseen. The basement became my refuge. Upstairs, ESPN highlights and my father's booming laughter echoed. Downstairs, it was quiet. The hum of a fluorescent light, the faint buzz of electricity, the smell of dust and metal. Cold in winter, damp in spring, but it was mine. Every corner, from crooked shelves of broken appliances to the workbench cluttered with screwdrivers, became a sanctuary. I didn't have a room where my voice mattered, but I had a place where things listened when I touched them. It started with a broken radio. Dad was about to toss it. Useless junk, he'd muttered. To me, it looked like a mystery. I took it downstairs, unscrewed the back panel, and stared at the intricate world of wires and circuits. I didn't understand it, but I knew it had once carried music. Somewhere inside the silence was a song, trapped. I spent hours cross-legged on the concrete floor, reading library books, watching YouTube tutorials late at night. After a week of trial and error, a faint crackle came through the speaker. Then static. Then a voice. My chest filled with something I couldn't name. Pride? Relief? I had made something broken work again. For the first time, something in my world listened. I ran upstairs, dusty radio in hand. Dad, look. I fixed it. He barely glanced up from the TV. That old thing? Huh. Well, get your brother a drink, will you? He's been practicing all day. I stood there, holding the radio like proof of my existence. Then I turned, walked back downstairs, and set it on my workbench. I never mentioned it again. That night, I made myself a promise. If no one in this house would notice me, I would build something that couldn't be ignored. The basement became a workshop of small rebellions. I took apart anything I could get my hands on: clocks, microwaves, broken game consoles. I learned to solder, strip wires, bring dead things back to life. Each spark from my soldering iron felt like a heartbeat, a pulse. That reminded me I was still here, still capable. Machines didn't care about charm or popularity. They responded to effort, persistence, understanding. I couldn't fix my family, but I could fix everything else. At 16, I built my first computer from discarded parts from the recycling center. The fan rattled, the screen flickered, but when it powered on, I felt like I'd opened a portal. I taught myself basic coding, 3D printing, filling notebooks with designs. It wasn't about escaping reality. It was about building a reality where I finally belonged. Of course, Dad didn't see it that way. He'd come down, usually to store old paint cans. He'd frown at the clutter of circuit boards. You should spend less time with junk and more time doing something useful. I never bothered explaining that junk was what kept me alive. Mom would sometimes peek in, her face half lit. Don't work too hard, Isabel. You'll hurt your eyes. Then she'd vanish. Not cruelty, just habit. The habit of staying out of Dad's way, even if it meant staying out of mine. One afternoon, I found old speakers in the garage, the ones Dad used when he played vinyl. Warped wood, torn cone, frayed wiring. Poetic, somehow. Something once loved, now discarded. 2 nights I spent repairing them. Rewiring, sanding, sealing. When I finished, I carried them upstairs, so proud. Dad was reading the sports section. It works again, I said quietly. You can use it in the living room. He looked up, nodded. Good. Now grab Ethan a glass of water before dinner. That was it. No acknowledgement, no curiosity. Just another reminder that even my successes were invisible. I stood there, the irony stinging. I had given sound back to something broken, yet no one in this family would ever hear me. That night, I went back to the basement, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark. The repaired radio played soft jazz. The saxophone notes curled through the air like smoke. Maybe I wasn't meant to be heard here. Maybe the silence of this house wasn't something to fight. Maybe it was something to outgrow. Every wire I soldered, every device I repaired became a step closer to freedom. I wasn't just fixing things, I was building an exit. I promised myself I would leave this basement, this house, this town. And I'd never look back. I didn't know where, just that it had to be far enough his voice couldn't reach me, and close enough I could still hear the hum of something I had built that worked, because I made it work. The letter came on a Thursday, tucked between a grocery flyer and unpaid bills. White envelope, embossed red seal. Stanford University. Office of Admissions. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Congratulations. We are delighted to offer you a full scholarship. I read it over and over as if it might vanish. Then I ran. burst into the living room where Dad sat, reading the sports section. "Dad," I gasped. "I got in. Full scholarship. Stanford." The name felt sacred on my tongue, proof I'd done something undeniable. I waited for his reaction. Surprise? Pride? Even a smile? He just folded the newspaper slowly. Looked up with the same expression he might give a weather forecast. "Stanford," he repeated flatly. "That's in California, isn't it?" I nodded, still grinning. "Yeah, it's one of the best engineering programs in the country." He leaned back, exhaled. "That's too far. Ethan's choice is much more practical. If you want to go that far, you'll have to figure it out yourself." He picked up his newspaper, conversation over. "Mom," by the sink, murmured, "your father's just worried about the distance." She wouldn't meet my eyes. No one said congratulations. No one took a picture. No cake, no dinner, no "we're proud of you." The moment that should have been a victory felt like a private secret, small enough to fit in my pocket where no one could take it away. That night, in the basement, I unfolded the letter again. The words still glowed, but they didn't feel like triumph. They felt like escape. I whispered "Stanford" aloud, letting the sound fill the empty room. Leaving didn't just excite me, it felt necessary. The months blurred. I worked part-time, fixed electronics for neighbors, sold custom speakers online. Every dollar was an inch more distance between me and that house. Ethan, meanwhile, had a graduation party that took up the entire backyard. Dad wore his favorite polo, beaming in every photo beside him. My departure? No party. Just a quiet morning and a half-packed suitcase. At the airport, Mom hugged me quickly, hands cold. "Call when you land," she said softly. Dad stood beside her, stiff. "I tried one last time. I'll send photos." He nodded, looking somewhere past me. "Just don't forget where you came from." When it was time to board, I turned back. He was already turning towards the parking lot, shrinking. Mom followed, head down. Through the glass, I pressed my hand against the window, watching their silhouettes fade. A faint print on the glass, a mark that would disappear. On the plane, the Stanford letter stayed in my pocket. I gripped it whenever uncertainty rose. I told myself maybe distance would sharpen their vision. Maybe they'd finally see me. But in California, no message came. "No, we miss you." "No, we're proud." Just silence. The first few weeks were dizzying. Stanford was a different planet. Red-tiled roofs, palm trees, students with names of clubs I'd never heard of. I felt like an imposter. My roommate's parents flew in, brought flowers, took pictures, cried goodbye. I stood at the window, pretending not to watch, my hands empty. At night, I stared at the ceiling fan. My father's back turned at the airport, my reflection in the glass. I'd traveled 2,000 miles, but the distance inside me had doubled. It wasn't just geography, it was silence, carved into me like a second skin. I poured that emptiness into work. I studied harder than anyone. Hours in the computer lab. I joined the robotics team. The hum of machines replaced the conversations I didn't know how to start. When circuits lit up, I felt peace. The same quiet satisfaction from the basement. But sometimes, after finishing a project or acing an exam, I'd catch myself glancing at my phone, waiting for a text that would never come. That's when I understood, leaving home doesn't erase the hunger to be seen. It only changes where you starve. I thought distance would make them realize my worth. I thought success would make them proud. I was wrong. It only made the silence louder. Those first years felt like walking a tightrope. Exhaustion and survival. I arrived with 2 suitcases, a second-hand laptop, and enough savings for 2 months. The scholarship covered tuition, not food, housing, books. So I worked 2, sometimes 3, part-time jobs. By day, algorithms. By night, wiping tables. Weekends, stocking boxes. My body never stopped moving, but my mind clung to one mantra: keep going. Dinner was instant noodles. My bed, a sofa in a cramped shared apartment. My roommates had parents who wired them money. I had silence. On sleepless nights, I'd stare at the ceiling, my mind wandering back to the basement, the hum of machines, the scent of dust and oil. Strange how something that felt like exile was now the only place I'd ever felt certain of myself. I found a haven in the university's robotics lab. Open 24 hours, dimly lit, smelling of solder and ozone. There, amidst drones and wires, I felt alive. Machines were my language, predictable, logical, reparable. People, not so much. I'd lose hours perfecting a motion sensor. Sometimes I stayed so long the janitor would flick the lights to remind me it was 3 a.m. It was during one of those nights that I collapsed. Hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. Hadn't slept in 3. My vision blurred testing a circuit board. Next thing I knew, I was on the floor, faint taste of metal in my mouth. A grad student, Michael, found me, rushed me to the clinic. When I woke, he sat beside my bed, holding warm tea. "You need to take care of yourself," he said gently. I wanted to laugh. Take care of myself? It was the only thing I'd been doing since I was old enough to realize no one else would. The doctor said I was severely anemic, undernourished, dehydrated. He suggested I call home. Ask for help. I nodded, but I knew that wasn't an option. The last message from Dad was months ago, a forwarded link about Ethan's latest trophy. No comment. I deleted it without reading. So, I went back to work. Slower at first, but more determined. I learned to survive on little, discount groceries, late-night leftovers, free bread. I told myself it was temporary. Struggle was the tax for freedom. And it was true. Every hardship taught me how to code faster, think sharper, repair what others would discard. I started freelancing, helping small businesses automate logistics. That's how I fell in love with systems, not just machines, but the invisible networks that made them work. By graduation, I had a portfolio, a reputation for stubborn obsession. A startup in San Jose reached out. Logistics optimization. Designing routes, managing warehouses, using AI to reduce waste. Small company, 2 engineers with big dreams. I started as an intern, barely covering rent, but for the first time, I was building something that mattered. The pace was brutal. 12-hour days, sometimes 16. Founders slept on office couches. Soon, I did too. Our software crashed more than it ran. Clients canceled. Investors ghosted us. At one point, we had $800 left. I stayed anyway. Fixed bugs until my eyes stung, rewrote modules overnight. 1 week, I barely saw the sun. Just screens glowing, and the steady thump of my heartbeat reminding me I was still alive. One evening, after a particularly long day, I stood outside, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. The world was quiet. Cars passed. Neon signs flickered. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. No one here cared about Ethan. No one cared who my father was. The only thing that mattered was whether the system worked, whether the code held, whether the trucks moved on time. I had finally found a world where effort was currency, and I could finally afford to exist. But success inched forward slowly. Months blurred into years. Exhaustion became familiar, almost comforting. I learned to code on 4 hours of sleep, make calls with a fever, smile during investor meetings when my hands shook from caffeine and stress. It wasn't easy, but it was real. I was building something tangible, brick by invisible brick. Sometimes, late at night, I'd turn on the small radio I kept by my desk, the same model I'd repaired in Dad's basement. It played quietly, filling the sterile office with warmth. I'd watch the monitors flicker and think about how far I'd come. I wasn't anyone's daughter here. I wasn't the other child. I was Isabel Hart, an engineer, a builder, a woman who made systems work. Still, there were nights when loneliness pressed heavy. The kind of silence no machine could fill. I'd imagine calling home, just to hear a familiar voice. But I knew what waited: indifference, small talk, maybe a mention of Ethan's latest milestone. So, I called no one. I told myself family could be built like circuits, carefully, intentionally, with patience. I just hadn't found the right blueprint yet. Years later, looking back at those long nights, the hunger, the fear, the endless grind, I didn't see failure. I saw a foundation. Those years didn't break me. They shaped me. They taught me strength isn't about who catches you when you fall. It's about learning to stand back up, even when no one notices you're down. I used to think I needed someone to lean on. But the truth is, I didn't have anyone. So I learned to become the thing I needed most. I became my own anchor, my own safety net, my own place to land. And that, I realized, was the beginning of everything. Success came quietly, almost without warning. One day, I was sleeping on a worn leather couch, debugging a routing algorithm. The next, our software was used by hospitals across California. It started small. A few clinics testing our logistics system for medical supply delivery. Then the pandemic hit. Suddenly, every hospital in the state needed what we had. Demand exploded overnight. The chaos that broke other companies became the wind beneath ours. Our platform, once held together by late nights and borrowed servers, became the unseen backbone of an entire medical network. We optimized routes for ventilators, masks, oxygen tanks. Our dashboards predicted shortages, rerouting trucks to keep ICUs from collapsing. For months, I barely left the office. My team slept on folding beds, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline. Every ping from my phone, another shipment delivered, another hospital saved, felt like proof that my years of quiet work finally mattered. News outlets picked up the story. A small California startup is redefining emergency logistics. My inbox flooded with interview requests. One morning, an email from Forbes. Congratulations. You've been selected for the 30 under 30 list in healthcare and technology. I stared at the screen. That basement girl, the one who soldered old wires while her father bragged about her brother, had just made it into a magazine her parents kept on the coffee table. The ceremony was in San Francisco, all glass and gold. Reporters buzzed, cameras flashed. People shook my hand, congratulating me on changing the game. I smiled, thanked them, posed under bright lights. Then a journalist, with perfect posture and a voice like honey, leaned forward during a live interview. So Isabel, she said, how does your family feel about your success? The question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. I smiled the same polite smile I'd learned years ago. They're not really into this kind of thing, I said. They don't care much for technology. The interviewer laughed, assuming I was joking. Cameras flashed again. But behind that laugh, something inside me went quiet. Later that night, in my hotel room, the award plaque resting on the desk, the city outside glittering with celebration, I felt none of it. I thought of my father in his recliner, watching football, unaware his daughter's name had been broadcast nationally. My mother, tidying up after dinner. Probably flipping the channel before my segment aired. Ethan, celebrating some promotion of his own. The silence from home was predictable. Not even a text. Not even a question. I used to think if I achieved enough, it would force them to see me. That success would be a spotlight bright enough to pierce their indifference. But all the lights in the world couldn't reach them. When the ceremony ended, I stepped outside, trophy in one hand, phone in the other. The night air was cold, the street wet. My reflection in the building's mirrored wall looked like a stranger, tailored suit, confident smile, hair neatly pulled back. I tried to see the girl my father had ignored, the one who sat at the kids' table, but she was gone. And yet, in her place, I felt only emptiness. Over the next few months, the company scaled faster than I could imagine. National distributors, dozens of states, acquisition offers from corporate giants. My calendar packed. I learned the language of business, efficiency, capital, growth. Powerful words, but they meant little to the child who just wanted to be seen. Every time a new milestone was reached, someone would say, "You must be so proud." I'd nod, smile, thank them. But pride was a strange, foreign thing. I didn't feel proud, just tired. Tired of chasing acknowledgement that never came. Tired of filling the silence with achievement after achievement. One night, after another interview, I went home to my empty apartment. Poured a glass of wine, scrolled through my phone. Past articles praising my visionary leadership. Then I stopped at a photo from the Forbes event. Me holding the award, cameras flashing. The caption read, "From basement tinkerer to tech visionary, Isabel Hart proves that grit beats privilege." Privilege. I laughed quietly, bitterly. They had no idea. Privilege was Ethan's name on every trophy, his seat at the adult table, the easy comfort of being loved without earning it. What I had wasn't privilege. It was survival dressed up as ambition. I closed my laptop, set the award on the shelf, and sat in the dark. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The city glow painted soft rectangles on the floor. I had everything I thought I wanted: success, stability, recognition. But none of it filled the hollow space I'd carried since childhood. When you grow up invisible, you think visibility will save you. You think if you shine bright enough, the people who ignored you will finally turn their heads. But all it does is cast longer shadows. The next morning, I woke before dawn, watching the fog roll over the city. For the first time, I allowed myself to whisper the truth. They'll never see you the way you hoped they would, and strangely, instead of breaking me, the thought felt like freedom. The world saw me now. My colleagues saw me. But my parents? They never would. And maybe that was okay. Because somewhere deep inside, I was beginning to understand something even more powerful than being seen, the peace of knowing I no longer needed to be. After the acquisition deal closed, my world moved faster than I could feel it. Meetings, contracts, lawyers, headlines. It all blurred. The number in my bank account didn't feel real. I'd lived counting coins for instant noodles. Now I could buy almost anything. But when the noise faded, when the congratulatory email stopped, I realized I didn't want anything. I wanted somewhere that felt like peace. I found it on a gray morning in Seattle. The city wrapped in mist, air sharp with salt and rain. The realtor led me to a glass-walled apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the ocean shimmering like liquid steel. The space was quiet. No echo of footsteps, no hum of conversation. Just the distant rhythm of waves. "It's a bit cold for some," the realtor said, "but it has a view you'll never forget." I didn't need to think twice. I signed the papers that afternoon. The apartment wasn't extravagant. It felt intentional. Every line clean, every detail precise. I filled it slowly, not with luxury, but with meaning. Dark walnut floors, warm under bare feet. Cream walls, catching the light from the water. In the center of the main room, I placed a long walnut dining table. 10 chairs. All the same height. No kids' table. No hierarchy. Every seat equal. Every voice welcome. I ran my hand along the smooth surface. "This is the table I've waited my whole life to sit at." On one wall, I hung my degrees and patents in simple black frames. The Stanford diploma, the company's founding certificate, the engineering patent that had changed my life. No family photos. Not out of bitterness, but because this space represented the woman I had built from scratch. The one who existed beyond comparison, beyond anyone's expectations. I furnished it like a sanctuary. A deep brown leather couch. A bookshelf lined with novels, essays, and old engineering manuals. The kitchen gleamed with polished marble, though most nights I cooked simple meals, soup, bread, tea. The bedroom faced the bay, where the early sun melted through the fog. It was everything my childhood home wasn't: quiet, balanced, mine. One of the last things I brought in was the old radio. The same one I'd repaired as a teenager in Dad's basement. Scratched and faded now, knobs dull. But when I placed it in the living room corner and turned it on, it still worked. Crackle, then a soft tune. Static and melody blending like a memory you don't want to erase. That sound filled the room differently here. Back then, it was proof I could bring something broken back to life. Now, it played in a place that existed, because I had done exactly that with my life. Sometimes in the evenings, I'd sit by the window with tea, watching the ferries drift across the bay. The skyline shimmered, quiet, deliberate. Like a city that didn't need to prove anything. That's what I wanted for myself. For years, I'd chased success like a starving person chases warmth, believing that once I had it, I'd finally feel whole. But here, in this stillness, I understood something different. Success was just noise. Peace was the melody underneath. People started to notice the change. Colleagues asked why I hadn't bought a mansion, why a quiet place instead of a penthouse. I smiled. Because I didn't buy luxury. I bought peace. And it was true. This wasn't a prize. It was a reclamation. Every plank of wood, every piece of glass, every inch of silence was mine. Earned through years of invisibility, hunger, and persistence. In this apartment, I could finally breathe. I could play music without turning the volume down. I could eat dinner at my own table without waiting for permission to speak. I could look around and see a life that no one had given me and no one could take away. Some nights, I'd leave a single lamp on, letting the room go dim. City lights flickered through the window, dancing across the glass walls like ripples of gold. I'd sit there, tracing the grain of the wood, thinking about the years it took to reach this place. The basement, the rejection letter that became a scholarship, the nights I coded until my hands cramped, the company born from chaos. And always that voice, my father's, echoing faintly from the past. Some kids make you proud, others just take up space. I smiled every time I thought of it now. Because here I was, 3,000 kilometers away, surrounded by space I had made for myself. And it was beautiful. The old radio played softly, a perfect, steady sound. I imagined the younger version of me, sitting on the cold concrete floor, holding a soldering iron, dreaming of somewhere she could belong. If she could see me now, the table, the ocean, the quiet, she would understand. I hadn't just built a home. I had built a new world. This place wasn't proof that I'd made it. It was proof that I'd healed. That I'd stopped asking for permission to exist. And in that stillness, beneath the hum of the radio and the slow rhythm of the sea, I realized something simple and true. I didn't need to fix anything anymore. Not machines. Not relationships. Not myself. Everything that mattered was already working. 7 years had passed since that foot in Indiana. 7 years since I'd stood in that house with its polished oak floors, its heavy curtains, its photographs of Ethan smiling from every wall. The invitation came in an email, polite, almost sterile. Thanksgiving dinner, 6 p.m. Hope you can make it. Mom. No mention of Dad. No warmth. No apology. Just an address I still knew by heart. For a long time, I hovered over the delete button. I didn't owe them my presence. Not after years of silence. But something in me, not bitterness exactly, but a deep need for closure, whispered that it was time. Not to reconcile, but to return one last time and see the people who had once made me small, now from the vantage point of someone who no longer was. The flight to Indianapolis felt surreal. I watched clouds roll by and thought about all the miles between the girl who had left and the woman who was returning. I wasn't coming back to prove anything. I didn't need to. My life in Seattle had already answered every unasked question. This, I told myself, wasn't about victory. It was about ending the story on my own terms. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked smaller. The maple tree that once seemed enormous barely brushed the second-floor windows. The porch light still flickered. Inside, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air, familiar, almost painfully so. My mother opened the door, smiling nervously. "You look different," she said. "Older." I smiled softly. "Time does that." Ethan was already at the table, his wife beside him, their 2 kids whispering into iPads. My father sat at the head, as always, carving the turkey with mechanical precision. He looked older, too. Hair thinner, shoulders slightly stooped. But his presence still filled the room like static electricity. When he looked up and saw me, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Then it vanished. Dinner began with small talk. Ethan's promotion, the kids' school achievements, the new car. No one asked about Seattle or the company or the Forbes list. I didn't mind. I wasn't here for their curiosity. I cut my food slowly, listened, smiled when it was polite. The sound of silverware on porcelain filled the gaps. Then, as plates cleared and the second bottle of wine opened, my father lifted his glass. "A toast," he said. The room quieted. His voice, the same calm, deep tone that demanded attention. He looked at Ethan, then at me. "Some kids make you proud. Others." His lips curved into that familiar smirk. "Just take up space." The laughter came easily, just like it used to. Ethan chuckled. His wife covered her mouth. Even the children giggled, not understanding. My mother looked down at her plate, the way she always did when she wanted to disappear. For a second, the old ache rose in my chest. That instinct to shrink, to let it pass, to pretend it didn't hurt. But the woman sitting there wasn't the girl who once hid in the basement. I set my fork down gently. Looked at him. "Good thing I just bought my own place," I said evenly. My voice was calm, but sharp enough to slice through the laughter. 3,000 kilometers away. So no one has to make space for me anymore. The laughter stopped instantly. Forks froze. The room fell into that thick, airless silence that follows a truth no one expected. My father's smirk faltered. He blinked, unsure if I was joking. My mother finally looked up, eyes wide. Ethan shifted in his chair, suddenly fascinated by his glass. I held my father's gaze. Not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, indifference. Then I smiled. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly, pushing my chair back. The food was lovely. No one moved as I stood. I walked around the table, my heels clicking softly. At the doorway, I paused, turned back, taking in the scene one last time. The table where I was never enough. The faces that had never really seen me. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. "And don't worry, I won't take up any more space." Then I left. The night air outside was cold and clean. The sky a deep indigo, scattered with stars. I walked down the driveway to my rental car. The sound of the door closing behind me sealed something larger than just a meal. It sealed a lifetime. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. For years, I'd thought healing meant reconciliation, that peace required understanding. But now I realized, sometimes peace is simply walking away without the need for anyone to follow. The road stretched ahead, empty. Headlights carving tunnels through the dark. I rolled the window down, letting the cold wind whip across my face. The old radio was on the passenger seat, playing a faint, crackling song from some late-night station. As I listened, I thought of the girl I once was, sitting at the kids' table, small, invisible, waiting for her turn to belong. I wanted to tell her, *, you never needed a seat at their table. You were always meant to build your own. Asterisk, when I reached the edge of the city, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house was far behind me, swallowed by the dark. I didn't need to see it anymore. I had already left the part of me that needed it there. And she could finally rest. I didn't win that night by saying something clever. I didn't win at all. I simply stood up and walked away. And that was enough. Christmas arrived, wrapped in the soft gray mist of the Pacific Northwest, the kind that blurred the line between sea and sky until everything looked like peace. In the week leading up to it, my apartment slowly transformed. Evergreen wreaths over the glass doors, threaded with crimson berries and golden lights. The long walnut table that had once stood empty now gleamed under candlelight. For the first time, I wasn't preparing for solitude. I was preparing to share it. It started as a simple idea, an antidote to the hollow echo of that Thanksgiving night. I didn't want to spend Christmas pretending the silence from my family didn't sting. I wanted to fill that silence with something real, something human. So, I opened my door to everyone who had ever been made to feel small, unseen, or forgotten. I wrote the invitations by hand. To Dr. Lang, my former robotics professor at Stanford, who once told me, the world needs more quiet builders. To Nora, a fellow engineer who'd been laughed out of her old job. To my neighbor, Miguel, a single father working double shifts. To an older couple from my building who'd lost touch with their children. To my cousin Sarah, the only relative who had ever defended me at family dinners. And, most tender of all, to my grandmother. When I called her, her voice cracked. Seattle? Oh, sweetheart, that's so far. Grandma, I said, smiling, I'll send the ticket. You just bring yourself. She chuckled softly. You sound like your mother used to, before she learned to whisper. On Christmas Eve, the first snow of the season dusted the city in quiet silver. Inside, the apartment glowed like a lantern. The table was set with white porcelain, crystal glasses. Sprigs of pine and cranberry ran down the center. The air smelled of rosemary, butter, salt. The chef I'd hired had filled the kitchen with roasted salmon and fresh bread. A playlist of soft carols floated through the space. One by one, they arrived. Nora first, laughing through the cold. Dr. Lang with a book wrapped in newspaper, muttering about wrapping paper. Miguel and his son with homemade flan. My grandmother arrived last, small frame bundled in a red coat, her eyes shining brighter than the lights. When everyone had settled, I stood at the head of the table. For a moment, I just looked at their faces, each marked by resilience. Then I said, I know some of us didn't have a place to go this Christmas. But tonight, I wanted to make sure everyone had a seat. No one at the kids' table. No one in the corner. No one forgotten. Laughter rippled around the table, gentle, genuine. I sat down. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own story. Dinner unfolded in slow, beautiful waves. Salmon, wild mushroom risotto, warm sourdough. Wine flowed easily, conversation even easier. Nora told stories of night shifts, turning corporate arrogance into comedy. Dr. Lang recounted the time I'd accidentally flooded the robotics lab with foam, making everyone laugh so hard I nearly spilled my drink. Miguel's son, a bright-eyed 9-year-old, challenged everyone to a trivia game he'd made. He beat all of us. The table was alive, clinking glasses, shared laughter, hands reaching for bread. No competition, no hierarchy. Just connection. Between courses, I slipped into the kitchen. My grandmother followed, quiet as always. She stood beside me, watching me work. Then she said softly, you know, Isabel, I've sat at tables in my life. Big ones, small ones. Ones where people spoke too loudly, and ones where no one spoke at all. But this. She gestured towards the laughter drifting from the dining room. This feels like the first real family dinner I've been to in a long time. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. It's not really family, Grandma. Not by blood. She smiled, reaching for my hand. No, sweetheart. Better. It's by choice. When we returned, dessert had begun. Slices of flan passed around. Plates cluttered with crumbs and joy. Someone had turned up the music slightly. A few people were singing softly. I looked around the table. Every person there carried a story of exclusion. The teacher dismissed for his accent. The colleague ignored for her gender. The cousin labeled too emotional. The grandmother treated as background noise by her own children. Every single one of them had been told, in one way or another, that they took up too much space. And yet here we were, filling a room beautifully. As the night deepened, I raised my glass. To the ones who were left out, I said, And to the ones who learned to build new tables. The room fell quiet, then erupted in gentle cheers. Glasses clinked. Someone started humming again. Later, when the plates were empty and the candles burned low, we all stayed at the table, talking, sharing memories, laughing about nothing and everything. I noticed how easily everyone listened. No interruptions, no comparisons. Just warmth. My grandmother reached for my hand again, her voice a whisper meant just for me. "You did it, Isabel," she said. "You built the kind of family your father never understood." "Oh, Gray," I turned to her, the candlelight catching in her eyes. "I didn't build it alone," I said. "They came, and they made it real." She nodded slowly. "That's what real families do. They make each other real." When everyone had gone, the apartment fell silent again. I stood by the window, overlooking the dark bay. Snow still fell, soft and endless. The table behind me was a beautiful mess. Empty glasses, napkins folded into careless hearts, the faint scent of pine and vanilla. I thought about the home I'd grown up in. The rigid lines, the quiet expectations, the laughter that never reached me. And then I looked around this room, filled hours earlier with imperfect, ordinary people who had chosen to show up, to care, to belong. In that moment, I understood something I never had before. Family isn't where you come from. It's where you are seen. No one here shared my last name. But every heart that had walked through my door that night had left something. A piece of grace. A spark of healing. A fragment of the love we were all still learning how to give. I walked over to the corner where the old radio sat. I turned the dial gently until a faint tune drifted out, a soft jazz version of Silent Night. The same song that had played in the basement all those years ago, when I dreamed of a different life. Only now, it didn't sound like longing. It sounded like home. As the snow thickened outside, I whispered to no one in particular, "There's no family here tonight by blood." But every heart in this room was real. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving the city wrapped in quiet white. The apartment still smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon, the table a battlefield of crumbs and candle wax. I was barefoot, holding a mug of coffee, watching sunlight stretch across the floor, when my phone buzzed. Dad. 7 years of silence, and he was calling now. My thumb hovered. I hesitated, then swiped to accept. Isabel. His voice was sharp, controlled, the same tone he used when I was a child and had done something foolish. "Do you know what's happening right now?" I frowned. "Good morning to you too." He ignored it. "The entire town's seen those pictures. The Christmas dinner," he snapped. "Someone posted them online. Your cousin, I think. Everyone's sharing it. The warmest Christmas dinner in Seattle. You and your group. People are calling it inspiring." I blinked, surprised. I hadn't realized anyone had taken photos. Sarah, of course. She loved documenting moments. "Apparently," he continued, voice rising, "you said something about building a table F. Or the forgotten. You think that's funny? The comments are saying how your family rejected you, how you built your own. You made us look like fools, Isabel. The whole town's talking." I leaned against the counter, staring out the window. "I didn't make you look like anything, Dad. You did that all on your own. Watch your tone." There it was. The command. The old dominance. As if time hadn't passed. But I didn't shrink this time. My voice stayed steady, calm like the sea outside. "I didn't mention your names. I didn't blame anyone. I just hosted dinner for people who didn't have a place to go." He scoffed. "And you called it family." I smiled faintly. It felt like one. Silence. Sharp. Uncomfortable. I could almost hear him pacing. "You always did love dramatics," he said finally. "All this self-pity, parading your so-called independence." "What? You think you're better than us now?" "No," I said softly. "I think I finally stopped needing you to tell me I'm enough." He exhaled hard, as though my calmness offended him more than any argument could. "You have no idea how disrespectful this is. Your mother's been humiliated. Your brother called this morning, says people are asking what happened between us. You've dragged our family through the mud just to play the victim." I closed my eyes. There it is, the story they'd always needed to tell. That I was the problem. That I'd turned my back on them. I had lived my whole life trying to rewrite that narrative. But now I realized I didn't have to. They could keep their version. I had mine. "Dad," I said, quiet but firm. "You're upset because people saw something true, not because I said it. You've always cared more about how things look than how they are. Don't you dare talk to me like, 'Robert, that's enough.'" The voice came from somewhere behind him. Faint but unmistakable. My grandmother. I hadn't realized she was with him. Maybe she'd heard the whole conversation. "Mom," he started, but she cut him off. "No, you listen to me now." Her voice, thin with age, carried more authority than his ever had. "I saw those pictures too. I saw her table." There was a long pause. I could imagine my father stiffening. "But my grandmother didn't let him. She didn't shame you, Robert. She didn't even mention your name. She showed people something beautiful. A room full of souls who had nowhere else to go, sitting together, being seen. That's not humiliation. That's grace." She paused. "She's not taking up space." My grandmother continued softly. "She built a table big enough for everyone who was told there wasn't one. Even for you." Silence. Thick and trembling. The kind that comes when truth finally pierces pride. I stood by the window, gripping the counter, listening to the faint hum of the call. Finally, my father spoke, quieter now. "You don't understand, Mom. People, she interrupted, will forget by next week. But your daughter will remember this moment for the rest of her life. Don't make her remember that her father called her success an embarrassment." He didn't answer. "Robert," she said again, gentler now, "for once in your life, just be proud of her. Even if you don't understand her." That's all she ever wanted. A faint sound, maybe the phone shifting hands. Then my grandmother's voice, closer to the receiver. "Sweetheart." I swallowed hard. "I'm here, Grandma. I saw the photos. It was a beautiful dinner." Her voice trembled. "You looked happy. Truly happy." I whispered. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. Those 4 words hit deeper than any award or headline ever could. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I pressed my palm to the glass, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, letting her words sink into the space where all the old wounds used to live. "Thank you," I managed. "That means everything." "I know," she said softly. Then after a pause, "Don't let his anger make you doubt what you've built. Men like your father don't know how to love without control. But you? You loved without permission. That's stronger." "How?" I smiled through the tears I hadn't realized were falling. "I think I finally understand that." The line went quiet. Then I heard her say gently, "I should go, darling. He's pacing holes in the carpet." I let out a sound full of release. "Go easy on him." "No," she said, amusement in her voice. "He could use a little discomfort." When the call ended, I stood there in the sunlight, my phone still warm. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was clean. I didn't feel guilt for walking away or sorrow for what was broken. I just felt light. I poured myself another coffee and walked to the window. The bay shimmered under the winter sun. The world outside, impossibly still. For the first time in my life, my father's voice didn't echo inside me anymore. It had been replaced by another, my grandmother's. Firm, loving, and infinitely clear. Asterisk, she didn't take up space. She built a new table, asterisk, and as I watched the waves move in slow, endless rhythm, I realized I had finally done the same. For years, I'd carried the guilt of leaving, the fear that independence made me ungrateful, that success made me selfish. But that morning, with the ocean shining before me and her words still in my chest, I understood something simple and profound. Leaving wasn't betrayal. It was survival. And survival, in its quietest form, was the truest kind of love. The love that builds space for others to breathe. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who had walked away. I felt like the woman who had arrived. New Year's Eve crept in quietly that winter, not with fireworks or noise, but with the kind of stillness that feels like a page turning. The bay outside my window shimmered in soft blues and silvers, city lights reflecting off the water like 1,000 quiet candles. A week had passed since the call from my father, and my grandmother's words still echoed in my chest. I'd replayed them countless times. Asterisk, she didn't take up space. She built a new table. Asterisk, I sat at my desk that morning, watching the slow fall of snow against the glass, and typed a short message. New Year's Eve dinner. If you and Mom would like to come, there's a seat for you. But only if everyone agrees to sit at the same table. No head. No kids. No hierarchy. Equal seats. Equal voices. I hovered over the send button for a moment, my thumb trembling slightly, not out of fear, but from something quieter, acceptance. Then I pressed send. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 hours later, one arrived. It was from my mother. We'd like to come. Your father said yes. The words were simple. No apologies, no explanations. But they were enough. That evening, I set the table again. 10 chairs, perfectly aligned. Candles flickering softly. the sea beyond the windows stretching into darkness. The same table that had once been a symbol of defiance now felt like an invitation, not for reconciliation, but for understanding. At 7 sharp, the elevator chimed. When the door opened, my parents stood there, both looking smaller than I remembered. Time had carved fine lines around their eyes, and the confidence they once wore like armor seemed to have faded. My father's posture was still stiff, his pride intact, but his eyes flickered with something new, uncertainty. My mother smiled nervously, clutching a small box wrapped in silver paper. "Hi, Isabel," she said softly. "Hi, Mom. Come in." They stepped inside, glancing around the apartment. My father's gaze lingered on the wall where my degrees and patents hung, framed proof of the life they had chosen not to see. He said nothing, but I saw the faint tightening of his jaw. Dinner was quiet at first. The air carried the careful politeness of strangers trying to remember how to speak to one another. I served roasted halibut, rosemary potatoes, and wine from a small Oregon vineyard. My mother complimented the view, the food, the candles, anything but the distance between us. My father mostly listened, pushing his fork around his plate, glancing occasionally at the radio in the corner. Finally, it was my mother who broke the silence. "You always liked music," she said softly, nodding toward it. "Even when you were little, you used to fix that old thing downstairs. Remember?" I smiled faintly. "I remember." A long pause stretched across the table. The city lights danced through the glass behind them, painting soft gold across their faces. Then, unexpectedly, my father spoke. Maybe he hesitated, his voice slower now. Maybe I didn't see it. I looked up. "See what?" He exhaled. "What you were doing. Who you were becoming." I thought Ethan was the one who needed us more. "You always seemed self-sufficient." My mother nodded slowly. "I think I told myself you were fine, Isabel. You never complained. You just kept going." I didn't realize that silence doesn't mean peace. Her words landed gently, without defense or excuse, just a kind of late honesty. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I wanted to let it breathe, to let them feel the weight of what was being said. My father looked down at his hands. "I shouldn't have said what I said that night," he murmured. "The toast." I let out a small breath, not quite laughter, not quite forgiveness. "It's all right," I said softly. "You were right in a way. Some kids do make their parents proud. Others just make themselves free." He looked up, startled by the calmness in my voice. But there was no anger there, only truth. The rest of the evening passed in fragments of memory, small stories, laughter that felt tentative but real. Pauses that weren't uncomfortable anymore. For the first time, we weren't a hierarchy. We were just 3 people sitting at the same table, learning how to exist without old rules. Ethan had been invited, but he hadn't come. My mother mentioned him once, then stopped, sensing it wasn't the night for comparisons. After dinner, I poured us each a glass of champagne. Midnight was only minutes away. I stood and walked toward the balcony, the crisp night air meeting my face as I opened the glass door. Behind me, the city hummed, fireworks readying in the distance, laughter spilling from nearby apartments. My parents followed, standing quietly on either side of me. The sea below shimmered in moonlight, the sound of the waves rising and falling like breath. I raised my glass and said softly, "To new tables. And to equal seats." My father looked at me, then nodded. "To equal seats," he echoed. For the first time in my life, the words didn't sound forced. We stood there as fireworks bloomed above the water, bursts of red and gold lighting the sky. I thought about every dinner table I'd ever sat at. The kids' table that made me invisible. The family table where I was an afterthought. The empty table in my Seattle apartment that became a symbol of self-respect. And now this one. Imperfect. Quietly human. When the last firework faded, my parents said goodnight. My mother hugged me for a long time. My father lingered a moment, as if he wanted to say something else, then simply said, "Take care of yourself, Isabel." "I always do," I said. When the door closed behind them, the apartment fell silent again. But it wasn't the old kind of silence, the cold, echoing kind. It was soft, earned, full of space. I walked back to the balcony, still holding my glass. The reflections of the city rippled across the water like tiny constellations. I took a slow sip, feeling the bubbles sting the back of my throat, and whispered into the night, "Some kids make their parents proud. Others make themselves free." The words drifted into the air, dissolving into the sound of the sea. Inside, the candles on the table flickered, their flames swaying gently. The radio hummed a slow jazz tune, the same one I'd played on Christmas. I stood there for a long time, listening to the soft rhythm of the city, to the heartbeat of a life I had built without permission. Then, turning toward the camera, toward the invisible audience that had followed my story all this way, I said quietly, if you've ever been told that you take up too much space, remember this: you can build your own place. And if you do it with heart, with courage, with love, it won't just be a place. It will be a whole world. Don't wait to be invited to their table. Build your own. And make it wide enough for everyone who was once told they didn't belong. Have you ever felt like you had to build your own table? Tell me about it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. ***.